For section 8.7, we're going to look at the product to sum and then sum to product formulas. Luckily, I have it on semi-good authority that you don't have to memorize these. You just have to know when and how to use them. Okay, so that's going to be a huge relief because again, they're very similar to each other, so it sometimes is a little hard to keep them straight. Okay, um, please understand that the math department really feels strongly about you all memorizing formulas. Okay. I can't say it's necessarily what I would do, but I am going to follow their rules to the letter of the law. So if they say you have to memorize it, you need to memorize it, okay? Luckily for these, and I think there's 7 total, you don't have to memorize them, okay? Now, because you don't have to memorize these, I'm not going to go into great length on where they come from. If you are interested in it, I can show you. Essentially, for the product to sum formulas, you're starting with so if you go back and you remember the sum and difference formulas for sine and cosine, you basically take those formulas and kind of add them to each other or subtract them from each other, and it essentially gives you these formulas. I'm not going to take time in these videos to show you, but if you're interested, I can show you one-on-one, okay? But for the product to sum formulas, we have that if you've got sine of alpha times sine of beta, so you've got sine of some angle alpha times sine of some other angle beta, that's going to equal 1/2 times, well, then you get cosine of alpha minus beta minus cosine of alpha plus beta. So you take the value for alpha and beta, you subtract them, you add them, and then you find cosine of those angles. Now, if you have cosine of alpha times cosine of beta, so cosine of some angle alpha times cosine of some other angle beta, you take the angles and you subtract them and add them, and you find cosine of those. So you do 1/2 cosine, the difference of the angles, plus cosine, the sum of the angles. And then finally, if you have sine of alpha times cosine of some angle beta, that's going to be 1/2. You're going to take sine of the sum of the angles and then add sine of the difference of the angles. So be really careful about where those pluses are, where those minuses are, and just praise be, you don't have to memorize these. Okay, so let's see about example 1. I think we only have 2 videos for this worksheet, which is nice, like maybe 3 examples. All right, example 1 says express each of the following at, there we go. Express each of the following products as a sum containing only sines or cosines. So if you look at part A, we have sine of some angle, let's call it alpha, times sine of some angle, let's call it beta. So let's go up here and figure out which of these formulas we want to use. All right, so we have essentially 12 times sine of alpha times sine of beta. So that's looking like this first formula up here. So what we want to do is we want to fill this into 1/2 cosine. We're going to subtract the angles alpha and beta, and then we're going to subtract cosine of the sum of alpha and beta. And we're going to see what we end up getting. Okay? So let's do a little work here. So we do have this 12, so I'm going to start with 12 and then times this formula. So I get 12 times 1/2. And then I'm going to take cosine of the difference of the two angles. So I'm going to get cosine of 14x minus 9x. And then from that, I'm going to subtract cosine. But the argument for this is going to be the sum of those two angles. So 14x plus 9x. And we're going to do a little simplifying. We can start with 12 times 1/2, which is just 6. So I get 6 times cosine. Well, 14x minus 9x is 5x. I'm going to subtract cosine. And then 14x plus 9x is what, 23x? And I'm pretty much done. The only other thing we could do is potentially take this value of 6 and distribute it. So I could say this is 6 times cosine of 5x minus 6 times cosine of 23x. And you do have to be careful. As much as you want to, these are not like terms. The arguments are different, so you can't like combine the 5x's and the 23x's. This is really as good as it's going to get. There's nothing else you can do. So we would say this is our final answer. Okay, so make sure you know how to pick which formula. You can see we clearly are starting with a product because we have 12 times sine of 14x times sine of 9x. So you just have to be able to figure out which pattern we fit here. We have sine of some angle alpha times sine of some other angle beta. So that's why I chose this first formula here. Okay, now for part B, we have 18 times cosine of some angle 29x, we're going to call it alpha, times cosine of some other angle, 17x, we'll call that one beta. Okay, so we're looking for cosine alpha times cosine beta, and that looks like this middle formula right here. So we're going to be looking at 1/2 times cosine of the difference of the two angles plus cosine of the sum of the two angles. Okay? So let's fill this formula in. Now we start with 18 times all of this. So I'm going to take 18 times this formula. So 18 times 1/2. And then I get cosine of alpha minus beta. So 29x minus 17x. And I'm going to add that to cosine of alpha plus beta. So 29x plus 17x. All right. So let's see, 18 times 1/2, we can go ahead and simplify that. That's just going to be 9. And then cosine of 29x minus 17x, that's just going to be cosine of what, 12x? Okay. And then we're going to add that to cosine of 29 plus 17x. So 29x plus 17x, that's what, 46x? And again, there's not really anything else to do. We have different arguments, so we can't add these. So you can't like add cosine of 12x and cosine of 46x. Those arguments are totally different, so they're not like terms. So the only thing that we could really do is distribute this 9 on the outside. So I could say this is like 9 times cosine of 12x plus 9 times cosine of 46x. And that's it. Sometimes if when you add or subtract these angles, you get something that's like on the unit circle, you could continue to simplify. But in a situation like this is as good as it's going to get for us. Okay. So that's it for the product to sum formulas. In the next video, we're going to look at the sum to product formulas. And what's cool about the sum to product formulas is you can use the sum to product formulas to actually help you solve equations. And we'll look at one example like that. Okay.